Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Bulletproof Selling. As always, Sean Rhodes here, Chief Sales Sergeant of this wonderful place that I get to work called Bulletproof Selling, where we have one motto that guides everything. Our mission, our mantra is that hope is not a sales strategy. And so we're here as often as we can be, multiple times a week in most cases, to help salespeople remove hope from how they sell, how they prospect, and really, most importantly, how they serve. So over the last couple of years here at Bulletproof Selling, we've been able to have on as guests best-selling authors, Hall of Fame speakers, and folks that have spent their careers out there on the front lines, if you will, of business, folks that have been the tip of the spear for their companies. And of course, those are salespeople, sales leaders who can give us frontline feedback of what they see going on. And we talk a lot about removing hope here at Bulletproof Selling. And so the question often comes up when people hear that. They're like, yeah, Sean, that sounds good. But then, like, what do you do? If I remove all the hope that I have, I'd probably just sit around and stare at the wall because I hope people pick up the phone when I call. I hope they answer my emails. Well, we actually have learned because of my experience in the military, watching troops on the battlefield that couldn't rely on hope either. They had to replace that hope with something, and they replaced that hope with systems. And so we are here to build sales systems with our guests every single week. And out of these conversations, that system that we build is going to be available to you on audio, on video. We're going to create an actual written sales system out of it that's absolutely free. So you as a salesperson, no matter the size of your goals or the size of your team, you can remove hope from one more area of your sales strategy. And out of doing that, you keep removing hope day after day, week after week. You replace hope not just with systems, but you replace it with certainty. And replacing hope and being honest with each other about where we're relying on hope, where hope is actually factoring into the plan, is something that we had to be really open and vulnerable about in the military. You think about the military that, folks are just kind of rock hard. The vulnerability is a bad thing. Feelings is actually an F word in the military. I've heard that more than once. Well, believe it or not, if we're going to achieve our mission, then we have to be willing to stand up in the mission planning room and say, hey, we don't have the resources to pull this off. Or if we could do it, but we need these things that we don't currently have. Or we need to have more people on this. We need to have more intelligence. We need to pick a time when we're not going to be rolling this mission out in the middle of a sandstorm. A lot of reasons that you would want to stand up and be honest with each other about the mission that you have. So when I connected with our guest, who was a referral from another guest, yeah, believe it or not, we actually do use referrals here at Bulletproof Selling. We don't just talk about them, we use them. So he came to us from one of our previous guests, Ryan Staley, and he's willing to share with us from his experience growing up in sales through the front lines of sales all the way to leadership positions in sales teams, honesty and how it really plays into the field of selling, not just in how we talk to our prospects, but how we talk to each other. So I'm really excited about this conversation. I know I'm going to learn something that I can use to sell better, that I can use to remove hope. So let's dive into it. It's my pleasure to welcome to the show Mr. David Farrell. David, sir, welcome to Bulletproof Selling.
Hey, Sean, thanks for having me. Appreciate the time and thank you for your service to our country. Appreciate that.
It was my honor, David. Stuff that I did as a young man, I don't think my 40-year-old body could take these days, but that's why we have young men in the military as opposed to old guys like me. So with that being said, your bio in sales is about as long as my arm. So walk us through your career path in sales real briefly, and I'd really just love to know how did you find it for yourself in a leadership position? Because so many salespeople that they get promoted because they're really, really good at selling. They end up as sales leaders, and the organization just tanks. Well, you've been in enough sales leadership positions just from your bio that's like, okay, this guy knows what he's doing. So walk me through a little bit about that journey and how it landed you as the chief sales officer in so many of these companies.
Yeah. Thank you for that. So I think first and foremost, I sort of fell into sales. I was, as we talked about a little bit before, I grew up in college in radio. I wanted to be the next, Howard Stern and really get after it from a media standpoint. But when I graduated college, the job offer I had at the time was really just something where I couldn't afford an apartment and a car and paying my student loans. And so my dad was a salesman, made a solid living and made it look easy. So I think he was pretty good at it. And so I ended up taking a sales job here in Chicago and working in an organization. And I really chose that organization because of their training program. I thought, you know what? I don't know if sales is for me. Worst case scenario, I'm going to come out with some really solid sales training. And I just loved it. I think sales really for a lot of people gets that competitive juice going for you. And it's the thrill of the win or the loss. I remember one of my friends saying, why would you want to go into sales? You're going to hear the word no 95% of the time. And I thought, yeah, but I'm also going to hear yes 5% of the time. And that 5% for me is really going to be enough to sort of get me through those tough times. And so I was an individual contributor at that organization for 6 or 7 years. And I think what led me to leadership was that I was mentoring sales reps. I'd taken some under my wing in a formal standpoint, and I was getting more joy and satisfaction out of helping them overcome objections, handle situations, seeing them win a deal than I was out of my own deals. And at that point, I view just me personally, I view being an individual contributor as like, I just get to worry about me. It's kind of my selfish time in my life. And when I'm focused on teams, that's my ability to give back. There's that saying, when the elevator reaches the top, it's your responsibility to send it back down. And I've not met the top yet, but I'm still sending that elevator down to help folks get what they need out of their careers. And so I've been fortunate to help a number of teams that were underperforming turn into performing business units. And you build a reputation for yourself within your organization and your community, right? So when people see that you can come in and impact results, they're going to call you. You're not going to have to call them. And so I've been any sort of career change I've had has always been the result of being recruited out of an organization into another one to take on that underperforming business unit. I've yet to find the one that's operating at 125% and needs to take it to 150. I'm always in the, hey, this could be a total gut rehab, and let's see what you can do. So, and I just think, you mentioned honesty earlier, being honest and authentic with your goals, your plans, your strategy, and your people is really critically important to that.
And so let's dive into the honesty bit, because that's a topic that, it's like feelings are an F word in the military.
Yeah.
I think for salespeople, honesty, I can't think of a 4-letter word. Well, maybe one or two that begin with the letter H, but honesty is probably one of them. So in sales, where positive mindset is critical, if you go to a salesperson day after day and you're like, how are things going? Like, oh, my life sucks. Well, you're probably not going to make any sales. We have to have that internal self-agency, a little bit of it. But yet, like you said, we also have to show up honestly, because if I'm underperforming, even if I'm hitting my numbers, I could still be underperforming. I still could not be reaching my potential. So I've got to be honest with the people around me, with my leaders, to say, I know I'm doing great. I know I'm meeting my goals, but I think I could do better. Or, for a lot of us, and this happened definitely when we made the switch during COVID from in-person meetings into virtual meetings, numbers tank. And I need help. And I have to be honest enough and vulnerable enough to be open to say, hey, I love this career. I love serving the audience that we serve, the customers that we serve, but I need help doing this. So where do you see salespeople really relying on hope when it comes to their goals, when it comes to their plans, where honesty might be the solution, but I've got to get past that hope? Where does that hope manifest? How do you see that look?
Yeah, I think that individual contributors and salespeople feel like hope is such a critical part of getting through challenges. And so what they do is they hang their hat on maybe viewing the good and not viewing the negative. They don't want the negative to creep in. So they sort of hang their hat on hope. And I think that's the wrong strategy. I think what you need to hang your hat on is risk mitigation and honesty in everything that you're doing, right? So you mentioned COVID. When I was running a sales team during COVID, we were telemarketing for leads, right? Pick up the phone, rip and repeat. And we were getting an appointment for every 43 phone calls, like rain or shine, 43 calls, right? Okay. COVID hits, everybody goes home. We don't have a method for reaching you at your home office that outside of email, and our dials to appointments ratio went to about 127.
Ouch. Right? Oh, that's painful.
And so what I ran into with some sales folks was that they didn't realize the goalpost had moved so far, and they were still relying on this 43 dials. And when we're talking about sales process and closing deals, and people were saying my pipeline is just not where it needs to be. Well, yeah, you're running the old playbook. You're hoping that 43 dials gets it done. I get it that you don't want to make 127 dials to get an appointment. Neither do I, right? I don't want you to have to do that, but that's what it takes now, right? And so I think people just realizing for themselves that things may have changed, or there's an objection they can't handle, or there's a new competitor on the rise, and just knowing, hey, I've got a vulnerability here that I need to shore up. And I'm either going to do that through, sometimes working harder, or sometimes working smarter, or just a different sort of strategy. So I think people hold on to hope in that regard. And honesty is just them realizing, hey, what I was doing in the past is not working anymore and I need help. And then going to people, your coworkers, your colleagues, friends, family, your sales leaders, and saying, hey, I'm really stuck, or I can't see my way past this. And then it takes, as a sales leader, you've got to say, hey, I'm glad you brought that up. Let me tell you what I've observed too. And you owe them that honesty. And as a sales leader or a leader of any profession, I think when your people are coming to you, you've identified a gap, it's your responsibility to them and their success to make sure that they understand where they are and help guide them through that. And if you sugarcoat it and you say, yeah, I feel like you could make a few more calls, or, maybe you could try this, you just gotta get after it. I'm on it's like a war for the truth, right? How can I do something about it if I don't know where I sit today, right? So I see honesty kind of in both of those roles, as an IC and then as a leader.
And this is something that I hope a lot of salespeople out there listening to this are really tagging on to. He's not talking about just being honest in a way that, is more like sharing and caring. That's important in a team, like no doubt at all. But by being honest, it allows us to more quickly adjust to the changing landscape that we're in. So if technology shifts in your market, the more honest you are about that with yourself, with your team, with your leadership, the faster that you can change your strategy to adjust to that landscape. The problem I see with a lot of salespeople, and feel free to correct me, David, or tag in, is that they're often lagging in their response to what's happening around them in their market, in their industry, in the economy. The change happens, and then we try to play catch up as salespeople. COVID's a great example of that. If we're the people that are 2 weeks or 2 months or 2 quarters ahead of where our customers are today, and we show up with the solutions that they don't even know that they need, because we're being honest about the market landscape changing as we see it there, suddenly we're solution providers. We're showing up to serve instead of just to sell. So do you see that being honest, probably the most positive effect of that is it allows us to quickly adjust our strategy to get better results, or is there a benefit that even I'm missing?
No, absolutely. I mean, I think one of the best things that happened to me in my career is when I went from being a small market seller to a major market enterprise level seller. We were in the office at the time, right? And one of the biggest benefits I had to that was I could sort of lean back in my cubicle, and I had my mentor a couple cubicles down, right? His name is Brian, great guy, and he would say, "What deal are you working on right now?" And I would say, "Oh, I'm working on this." And he's like, "Tell me about it." And I would, "Oh, I'm going to close it. I've got this. I've got that. I'm a champion. They love me. They love our product. They love our company." And he would go, "Nah, you're dead." And I'm like, what are you talking about, man? I'm not dead in this. I'm closing this. He goes, "You're vulnerable here, here, and here. What are you going to do about it?" Right. And that to me allowed me to sort of see that forest through the trees and go, "Oh man, you're actually right." And now I can have a plan for how I can attack those things. I think all too often hope is the prospector client's really nice to me. I've got a great product and great service. I'm a fantastic salesperson, and I'm just gonna, they don't see the flashing warning signs or red lights. They only see the good. And so what that does is it prevents you from mitigating the risks that exist in your deal. Whether they're unstated or not, every deal has risks, right? If there were no risks, they wouldn't need us. AI would take over everything, right? So it allows us to sit down and strategize and say, hey, you know what? It's a manufacturing client. How are you going to handle this, that, and this within the deal? Do you have a reference? What if the CEO comes in? What if the CFO comes in? Do we have a plan for those things? And so you can go in now with not only a plan for that deal and for everything to go right, but a risk mitigation sheet for, okay, if they ask me this, here's how I'm going to respond. Or to your point, you can really guide the client. Hey, the last time I worked with a manufacturing client, they really needed this piece rate calculation. And let me show you how we've done that for others. And I have a reference to talk to you about it. And we're going to demo to that. It's a well thought out, executed plan that just simply increases your closing percentage. Because whether you want to address them or not, again, those risks exist. And if you're just going to go at it with hope and just, as your strategy, then you're just not going to get there. You're going to lose to a salesperson that has done the things that you're not willing to do.
And I'm reminded when you say that of some words by one of the greatest military strategists of all time. It was this guy that went by the name G.I. Joe. And he said that knowing is half the battle. And
Amen.
so
Yep.
I'm right there
You
with
got me
you.
through
That's
a tough
what
time.
you're talking about. This risk mitigation, risk assessment is something that we did on the military that actually saved lives. We
Yeah.
called it red teaming. So what we would do is, build a plan. Like, we need to achieve this objective in Fallujah, right? We've got to maintain control over these city blocks in a very dangerous area. We've got to get it done by this time. So we build the plan. Everybody involved in that, lots of man hours, and then we would take that plan to people that weren't involved in the building of it, people that had experience on the ground, that understood the landscape that we were going to be in, the people that we were going to be encountering. And we'd say, here's the plan. If you knew about it ahead of time, how would you rip it to shreds? How
Yeah.
would you stop us? How would you block us? How would you do all the things that would shut that plan down? And they would just, because they weren't part of the plan, and it's a fun
Yeah.
experiment, just go off and say, well, we would put a checkpoint here, and we would put snipers on this roof, and we would make sure that we had artillery and mortars staged over here, and they would just destroy us because they knew where we would be and
Yeah.
when. But out of that, we'd say we can't mitigate all those risks, but we'd identify the top 4 or 5. Say if we could shut those down, we'd be a lot safer.
Yeah.
Because knowing what the risks are going to be before you step into the battle space, it gives you not only the knowledge to defeat them, but the confidence to go in there showing up as your best. So let's build a sales system around
Yeah.
this, David, that allows us to essentially do the same thing, to risk mitigate
Yep.
a sale or a deal or a strategy that we might even have. Let's try to make it as applicable as we can.
Yeah, absolutely.
And again, this really begins with what we started our episode with, which is honesty. If I'm not honest enough to show up and say, I'm probably missing something here,
Yeah.
then it just means you're hoping you're going to barrel right in there and hit a brick wall or a bunch of brick walls and not get the results you're after. But by showing up, being honest enough to say, I need to bring this to somebody to get eyes on it.
Yeah.
Let's walk through what that process looks like, that risk mitigation plan. So
Yeah.
here at Bulletproof Selling, of course, every new system we build trims hope a little more from our strategy. So we use this acronym TRIM. The
Yep.
T in TRIM is the trigger element of this. So if I'm getting ready to do risk mitigation,
Yeah.
what is the pivotal event that causes me to pull this system off the shelf? Is it when I
Yeah.
identify a deal of a certain size? Is it way earlier in the sales cycle when I'm just designing my sales strategy? Where should I really begin risk mitigation in a way that's
Yeah.
repeatable across a bunch of different things?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it all starts with your first appointment with a
Okay.
with a potential customer. And we often talk about, is this a project, and should I participate, right? So let's talk about honesty. There's also honesty with your customer and your prospect. And if you're willing to come in and say, here's how I see us fitting in, or here's how I don't see us fitting in, you should be able to, in a first meeting with a potential customer, tell them why they're going to buy from you. You should be able to identify, hey, here's the value that I'm going to bring. And if you don't, then you should tell them that too, right? So let's say that a salesperson runs a first appointment, whatever your company's vernacular is with it. At that time, we should be leaving with a couple key things. We should be understanding their timeline. We should be understanding the buyer journey that they're going to go through, the steps in the process that they're going to take. We should understand things like who's on the project team, right? And competitive landscape and a consequence of an action. And if you know those things when you leave, then you can identify a risk in every single one of those areas. And that's what I would want to sit down with a coworker or a sales leader or an individual contributor in my role and say, hey, so their timeline is that they want to decide by this date and implement by this date, yet their journey doesn't match up. The steps they're going to take don't match up with that. Or so how can we align our sales process with their buying journey? Is there an opportunity for us to make a recommendation in there? So it actually influence it in a way that helps the customer be more successful in their project, right? Obviously we want them to buy from us, but help the client through the process. If we're single threaded, that's a huge vulnerability. And I'm dealing with one person that's going to make a decision for a 500 employee company. That's a risk. So I would sit down with a seller and say, hey, tell me about the buying team. Well, I'm working with in our instance, an HR generalist. Well, HR generalists don't typically sign contracts.
Yeah.
And they're functional users of the system, very important. But I would say, okay, so let's, tell me about that. How are we going to help that person through this process? How do we get the CFO involved? How do we get the CHRO involved? Because that's a risk. So effectively, it's our responsibility to each other, ourselves, to say, knowing the people in the room, the process, the timeline, the competitors, where are we at risk? You could identify a competitive risk, right? There's a competitor that's doing A way better than we are right now. Okay, so let's find out from the customer, how much does A matter to them on their depth chart of critical information, and what are we going to do to mitigate that? Can we maybe lose the battle on that front, win the war with the other 9 things that we do, right? Can we have that conversation with the customer? We practice that a ton on my sales teams. Is we'll sit down and tell somebody, hey, listen, out of the 10 things on your checklist, I can do 9 of them. I can't do that one. Do I still have a chance to earn your partnership, or should we part ways as friends? So I think first time meeting, you can leave with a number of different sort of risks that you've identified that you can then set up a plan for. And honestly, subsequently, any other time. So we do discovery calls where we ask a lot of questions. We do demonstrations. So what if somebody shows up to the demo that we weren't prepared for? We weren't ready for IT to come in the room, and my salesperson isn't ready to answer IT questions. How do we handle that? Right. And so I think what we're looking for, and back to your to your military plan and analogy, I'm not necessarily glad that those things happen, the emergencies happen, or the oh crap moment has happened, but I'm glad we prepared for it. And I want to be able to tell that prospect, hey, I'm really glad you asked that question. I'm so glad you showed up, CIO, because I actually have some information for you that I think you're really going to enjoy today. Right. Versus happening.
I want to make sure I'm following the process here. So we've got the trigger element is doing this, starting with as soon as that first appointment is booked. Yeah. And then the R and trim is actually repeatable. And those are the steps that we follow. And you've given us some great ones so far already in the repeatable category. I want to make sure I'm capturing what you're giving to me here. Making sure I identify what are the things I need to know about this prospect, their company, their challenges in order to make this deal happen. Yeah. Because not knowing any of those could be a risk, or if they refuse to reveal one of them, it could be a risk. So you mentioned, the challenges they have, the competitors that might get in the way of this, other people that are pursuing this account, things that we historically have stalled or lost deals on in the past, I think is a really important one. Yeah. If we always stall because we tend to contact these HR generalists and none of them can cut a check. Yep. They always have to get passed to somewhere else. Well, if that's a potential stall point that happens with most of our deals, how do we then cut that out? How do we get to the decision maker, the true decision maker, as quickly as possible? So if we've gotten that part of the repeatable bit out of the way, what else do I need to do? Because just knowing this is half the battle, literally. Yeah. So what do I do with that information as maybe step 2 or 3 in this process, so that I make sure when I do get on the call, I've already shored up that gap in my line?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's where these, sort of honesty conversations come in, because my trigger event is the appointment that's happened. I've identified, these sort of risks that exist because of that. And now I'm going to talk to somebody, have a plan for it. And that plan should be based off of either previous experience that they have, or just gaps conceivably in your process. We're up against a competitor that does A better than we can. Okay, then the plan is, how do we handle it? Do we have ways around that? What's the conversation going to look like if they ask about it? Should we be proactive with that conversation with the prospect and let them know, hey, you know what, we can't do that, but we can do this. And if you're, using hope as a strategy, or you're not being honest with yourself, those things are still going to come up. You're just not going to be ready for them. Mm-hmm. And this theory or concept around being honest with yourself allows you to have that plan in place so that you can take action for when it happens, because it's going to happen. And what I hate to hear on calls is things like, oh, that's such a great question, Sean. Let me get back to you. If it was such a great question,
I would have had the answer.
Yeah, you would have known that they were going to ask it, and you would have had an answer for it, or the right person on the call.
Got the trigger repeatable. I want to make sure we make it into improvable, because that's the I in trim. So we realized on the battlefield that if we weren't keeping up to date with technology, with the tactics of the people that we were out there facing every day, we weren't going to be set up for success. So if I've got this mitigation strategy in place and I'm doing it as soon as a call is booked, and obviously this is something you don't have to build for every single deal. If most of your deals look the same way, unless something drastic changes, hey, if you know you're always meeting with HR generalists, and this is like the
Yeah.
HR generalist mitigation plan,
Yeah.
you can build this for all the HR generalists that you have. But I want to make
Yep.
sure that I'm able to improve it because the HR generalist market might change, their software needs might
Yeah.
change, the buying decision tree may change. So how do I sit down quarterly, annually, however often you'd recommend it, and make sure that
Yeah.
I'm incorporating the changes that our folks are seeing out there on the front lines? So this
Yeah.
plan isn't good 5 years ago, but doesn't work for us today.
Yeah, I think you can do this on every deal, and you should.
Okay.
So even at a very basic level, in some instances, I just have an Excel sheet that says, am I multi-threaded? Yes or no. Is the decision maker a part of my process? Yes or no. Not the person that says I make all the decisions here, but the person that would sign the contract at some point. Am I there? Have I been in some cases on site with the prospect and shaken a hand and toured the facilities? I have reps put down top 3 reasons why we would win and top 3 reasons why we would lose. And that turns into, your plan, right? It is effectively, we're leaning into the reasons why we're going to win. And we're making sure that every time we talk to them, we're saying, hey, the reason we're meeting today is because we can really improve your efficiencies in this area or help you scale in that area. And then we've got that plan for those 3. So even if I'm just tight on time or I'm operating with velocity around a number of deals, I still have the time to identify 3 top risks and have a plan around how I'm going to mitigate those. And so I'll have reps present to me, hey, you're single threaded here. What's your plan for getting multiple people involved? Right? How can I help? Here's some strategies that have worked in the past. Hey, we're vulnerable in this regard. Now, with new competitors coming out and maybe not having, I think the system will always be valid because you're always those 3 risks will change as you go along, right? Oh, this new competitor came out. They have this widget that nobody else has. That becomes a vulnerability that we then strategize about. I'll give you an example. When I took over a sales team, there was a competitor that was doing implementations, and they were rep-led implementations, right? So the salesperson who built all this great rapport with their customer was then saying, I'm not just going to hand you off to an implementation team. I'm going to guide you through the implementation. And that sounds really attractive because I bought from you. I know you, I trust you. I like you, right? And we were getting smoked by it. Yeah. Everybody was like, who's going to do my implementation? Where are they located? Is it on site? And they were just eating our lunch about it. And so my reps kept bringing that to me. And so we actually went on Glassdoor. We went on LinkedIn. We started doing reading customer reviews about it. And we actually learned that the reps absolutely hated doing it because it was effectively 2 jobs for them. And it wasn't that impactful or effective for the actual buyer themselves. And so we took that greatest strength and turned it into their greatest weakness. So we started going to market saying, here's our implementation plan and why we're really excited about it. And let me tell you, our implementation people, that's their only focus in their professional life, is to get you through implementation. 8 to 5 every day, they are dedicated to your implementation. Our other companies, our other competitors, they'll have people that run 2 jobs. They'll be selling from 8 to 5 every day, and then they'll go home and implement your project plan. How successful do you think that's going to be? And listen, I'm a salesperson myself, and I lead sales teams. Sales folks are not exactly the best at details, right? And you really want to sale, and everybody always, gives you a little chuckle. Yeah. You really want a salesperson at home doing this amount of data entry on your behalf. And so I think that is the goalpost moved. Somebody was beating us. We identified it. We went out and crowdsourced a strategy around it. And then you go out in the field and you A/B test it. We started using that word track, and then we would get back together and say, hey, is that strategy working for us? Is it successful? How are people responding to it? And we end up starting to beat that prospect or that competitor probably, half the time we were up against them. And then the reps are excited about it because they've got a tool that they can deploy. So I want, with this risk mitigation, this strategy, you want to be able to say, I'm so glad you asked that question about implementation. Let me tell you about ours and why it's better, as opposed to, oh, wow, let me get back to you.
Let me get back
Right.
to you. I love it. Love it. So we've got the trigger element, repeatable, improvable. Now the M in trim is the one that most sales leaders care about, which is the measurable piece.
Yeah.
If I'm taking the time to do this before every deal, even if it's, take the time to build the big heavy engine on the front end for all of this type of buyer, and then I'm taking the time before every meeting to go through what are the top 3 things that could likely shut this down.
Yeah.
What am I going to do about it if and when they happen? I could be making calls during that time, right? I could be in
Yeah.
conversation, maybe not as productive conversation, but in conversation. So how am I measuring the effectiveness of this? Is it just
Yeah.
with gross sales? Is it with buyer engagement through the sales process, through the pipeline? What am I going to measure to make sure that the investment of time here is really paying off?
Yeah. Yeah. I think, look, I think the easiest thing to measure this is just closing percentage, right?
Okay.
Because this is a success for me in sales is sort of a 3-legged stool, right? It's doing the right thing the right way, the right amount of times. And you're in sales process. That's the right thing. Now you have to do it the right way. So this is a closing percentage increase strategy. And so you inevitably you have a closing percentage to start with. You have a baseline measurable. And then as we start to deploy this, even just mitigate these top 3 risks, you can start looking at the impact that that's having on your sellers. Just like, that competitor that we started beating 5 times out of 10, as opposed to 0 out of 10. We would splice the data down to how often are you up against this competitor now, and how often are we winning, right? You can look at how long your sales cycles, maybe how long you're in deals, right? I know nobody wants longer sales cycles, but every hurdle you jump in a sales process is closer to close, right? So it should be, at least, unless you're just, again, not being honest with yourself about any sort of gaps that exist. So I'd say closing percentage is a number one. I think with technologies that exist today to call record, a lot of times I'll jump in, I'll coach a rep on, hey, here are the 3 things that you're at risk for. So that's my honesty to them. If they don't see it, I owe them that. Hey, if the CFO comes in the room, here's what you have to be able to answer, right? We get them a plan, they put it in place. I can either attend the call, I can review the call in one of those call recording systems that exist today, and then we can workshop, hey, how did it work? So you can measure it from a data standpoint. You can measure it from I want to see it live in the field standpoint. I'm a big fan of getting out there and doing it with them. I think regardless of my title at any company, I've always been a get on a plane, get in the car, get in front, get my nose bloodied, handle it with them. I'll be the first to go do it, right? If they're a little skeptical about the plan, then I'll run the plan and I'll get bloodied a little bit with them.
Let them see it happen. I love it,
So
man.
that's a couple ways to measure
This
it.
has been to end-to-end a sales system that helps us identify where the gaps in our plan are likely going to occur and to address them ahead of time. Imagine the effect that this could have on those objections that just continuously shut you down. Imagine the effect this could have on the fact that what you sell costs more than all of your competitors combined, and you keep losing deals because of price. Well, if you know that price is going to be an objection walking in there, what are the 3 ways that we found work to just advance the deal further, if not to close it today? This is a great system. So I want to make sure people have a chance to get out there and use it, to begin building it for the types of conversations they're getting into. Now, David, normally I'd say, how do we get to your website? Well, for you, you're actually out there leading salespeople. So if people want to get in touch with you, they want to get more of this type of wisdom, they want to follow what you're doing. What platforms are you on? How do they connect with you? How do they do that?
Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, I'm a practitioner and a leader. So I would just hit me up on LinkedIn, David Farrell on LinkedIn. I look like this. My picture is my picture, not from 15 years ago. When I weighed a little bit more and had a little bit more hair, or a little less, had more hair. So and I'm here to help. So if there's a question about the sort of system that you and I discussed today, or there's a function that someone wants to understand, shoot me a note. I'm more than happy. As we discussed earlier, I'm a little bit of a sales nerd, so I just love that strategy part of it and helping people, get a win where before we might have stumbled and lost it.
That's the best way to do it, sir. So for all of you watchers and listeners out there, if you're catching this on YouTube, make sure you're hitting that subscribe button. Every single one of these live stream conversations are archived there. So if you want some really good video that's probably going to help you more in your career than watching cats play the piano, check out the Bulletproof Selling channel. Of course, if you're listening to us on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, anywhere that podcasts can be found, make sure you are hitting the subscribe button there as well. Leave us a review. That's the best thing that you can do to help other salespeople know that hope doesn't have to be part of our sales strategy anymore. And of course, for the great people like David that we've had on here over the years, it's amazing to get to serve the sales community with you, David. Thanks so much for giving back to the salespeople that are out there wondering how they can mitigate more of the risk in their sales process. So for all of us here at Bulletproof Selling, thank you so much for your time, David, for getting out here, joining us, build another sales system, and let's get out there and make selling bulletproof.